Treads churn the dirt. Screams of a petrol-electric engine. The driver wrestles with the control levers. The gunner braces himself for the coming impact. A shout from their commander.
Raus!
The crew scrambles out, climbing down and dropping into a pool of mud. Once the great panzers of Germany rocketed across plains and fields, driving all who would oppose the Third Reich before them. Today, they are stuck in the literal quagmire of the Soviet Union. The commander runs his fingers through his hair, taking a deep breath. It's been so long since he's seen action, and his crew's itching for a fight. It's an itch they'll have to wait a little longer to scratch. A metallic shriek cuts through the air, and the crew dives for cover as an explosion buffets them. Was it a shell? A mine? The crew rises slowly, taking in the sight of a burning plane. The commander looks skyward, where the German and Soviet pilots fight a desperate battle for the air. That is where the action is. Although the battle has become famous for its massive tank clashes, less attention has been paid to the equally fierce and no less important air battle fought in the skies above the battlefield. In today's video, we'll cover how these air engagements played out and why neither air force proved capable of claiming a decisive victory. If you've used the internet for a long time, then you've probably realized just how easy it is to waste hours of your time aimlessly browsing social media or scrolling randomly through cluttered news feeds, searching for a single kernel of interesting content. That's why I'm happy to announce that this video is sponsored by Morning Brew, a free daily newsletter designed to keep you up to date with the latest business, tech, and financial information. Morning Brew's articles are designed to be witty and engaging while giving you concise information on topics that are most relevant to you. For example, a lot of people have questions about the viability of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin these days, and Morning Brew had provided me with interesting articles on the topic, including a look at how celebrity influencers can move the market with a single tweet. Morning Brew is completely free and subscribing takes only 15 seconds. So add this essential tool to your learning arsenal today by using the link in the description below. The defeat at Stalingrad in February of 1943 was a major blow to German morale, shattering the myth of the Wehrmacht's invincibility. With Axis forces exhausted and overstretched, the Red Army seized the initiative, launching a counteroffensive known as Operation Little Saturn. The Soviets succeeded in driving their foes into the Donetsk Basin, liberating Kursk on the 8th of February and the major city of Kharkiv on the 18th. With the Soviets on the march and the Western Allies set to land in Italy, the Führer realized that time was against him. If the situation was to be salvaged, a decisive victory was needed on the Eastern Front. Hitler gave Field Marshal Erich von Manstein the authority to counterattack. By the 15th of March, Manstein's Army Group South had retaken Kharkiv and created a 250-kilometer or 155-mile wide salient in the Soviet line centered on the city of Kursk. Suddenly, the Wehrmacht had the opportunity to launch an attack onto the Bulge, destroying a significant portion of the Soviet forces there and preventing further counterattacks. The finalized plan, codenamed Unternehmen Citadel, or Operation Citadel, was set to launch on July 5th. It called for 2 simultaneous armored thrusts to break through the Red Army's defenses and envelop the salient at the city of Kursk. However, Soviet High Command anticipated the German plans and had arrayed a massive defense manned by the 12 armies of the Central and Voronezh fronts, as well as the newly formed Steppe Front. Not only did German assault formations lack the element of surprise, they were also greatly outnumbered. And worse still, the offensive lacked the desired fire support to break through the deeply entrenched Soviet positions. The Wehrmacht had suffered tremendous artillery losses at Stalingrad. As such, German commanders decided to rely on the Luftwaffe as flying artillery to supplement the offensive's firepower. The 1st Flieger Division and the 8th Flieger Corps were responsible for this task. The former had around 640 operational planes at its disposal to support the northern advance, but the majority of these were ground attack aircraft, as fighters were desperately needed to protect the German homeland from Allied bombing raids. In fact, its two fighter wings consisted of only 145 Focke-Wulf 190s. Meanwhile, the 8th Flieger Corps had a similar makeup of 730 planes, with 4 fighter groups consisting of 120 Messerschmitt Bf 109s. This brought their total operational strength to approximately 1,370 aircraft on the eve of Operation Citadel. With this combined force, the Luftwaffe promised they would be able to achieve a breakthrough after just 2 days of fighting. The Soviets, on their part, could rely on double the amount of air support. In the north, the 16th Air Army would cover the Central Front with some 1,030 operational planes. Backing it up was the neighboring 15th Air Army of the Bryansk Front, adding an additional 1,000 planes to the fray. And in the south, the situation was identical. Here, the 2nd Air Army, equal in size to the 16th, would be supported by the adjacent 17th Air Army in support of the Voronezh Front. Finally, both sectors could count on the supplementary support of the independent long-range aviation, as well as from the local air defense of Kursk. If these overwhelming numbers did not already put the attackers at a serious disadvantage, late on July 4th, a captured German engineer broke under interrogation, revealing the exact time and place the offensive was to start. With this knowledge in hand, Soviet leadership was now in an unprecedented position to seriously bloody the German assault before it even had a chance to begin. In the morning of July 5th, around 100 IL-2 Sturmovix and 200 fighter escorts launched a preemptive attack on 5 nearby German airstrips around Kharkiv to stop the grounded Luftwaffe from supporting the opening offensive. Unfortunately for the Soviets, the element of surprise was lost quickly as the Soviet formations were picked up by German radar, and numerous fighters were redirected to intercept the unsuspecting Soviet formations. What followed was nothing less than a massacre. Shortly before 3:30 a.m., the fighters made first contact. The less experienced Soviet pilots proved no match for their German counterparts. Soviet pilots were shocked to see Messerschmitts raining down on them like steely hail, breaking through the fighter escort and picking off the vulnerable Sturmovix with impunity. What planes managed to survive this onslaught were then greeted with heavy flak fire from the airfields. A Luftwaffe surgeon stationed on one of these airstrips noted that the Soviet planes had tumbled from the sky like dead flies. I doubt that a single machine made it back home. According to German reports, this bloody opening act cost the Soviet Air Force 50 aircraft. In return, the attack group had failed to destroy even a single grounded plane. The curtain fell on a crushing German victory. As morning dragged on, the Luftwaffe concentrated its forces in support of the ground assault. In the northern sector, the 1st Flieger Division's efforts earned the Germans initial air superiority. Observing friendly bomber squadrons and friendly escorts passing overhead, the commander of the 10th Panzer Grenadier Division reported that the Soviet air forces seemed to be neutralized. However, during the afternoon, the situation began to change as the 9th Army headquarters noted that haphazard and fragmented Soviet air attacks gradually gained in intensity and unity. Thanks to their overwhelming numbers, some Soviet planes managed to slip through the Luftwaffe's defenses, allowing them to strafe and bomb advancing elements of the armored spearheads. In the south, the situation followed a similar pattern. Despite encountering tenacious resistance, the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler reported outstanding support from our Stukas, as their highly accurate airstrikes, directed by air liaison officers, managed to knock out numerous well-entrenched Red Army positions. All was not sunshine and sauerkraut for the Germans, however. While the 8th Flieger Corps was fully engaged in support of the main advance, the Soviet 17th Air Army was able to mount concentrated attacks on the exposed and largely undefended German flank. Pilots and planes were at a premium, forcing Luftwaffe pilots to fly several sorties a day while their Soviet foes struck where the Germans were vulnerable. For a typical pilot schedule, let's look at First Lieutenant Erhard Jenert of the 3rd Group of Sturzkampfgeschwader 3. Jenert had started his first sortie of the day at 2:50 a.m. to support the initial thrust of the 9th Army. By the time he clocked out around 6:40, he had flown 6 missions with a total flight time of 7 hours. In total, German pilots flew 4,800 sorties after just a single day of fighting. By comparison, the combined Soviet air armies had only flown about 3,390, with more pilots flying fewer missions. Regardless, the Luftwaffe's efforts had failed to facilitate a considerable breakthrough, as neither thrust had managed to advance much beyond their starting lines. For this small consolation, the Soviet Air Force had paid the high price of 300 aircraft lost, including Captain Vladimir Zalewski, one of the Soviet Union's few surviving fighter aces and recipient of the title Hero of the Soviet Union, whose fighter was shot down during the morning's engagements. By contrast, the Luftwaffe had only lost about 60 of its planes. Although its pilots were greatly outnumbered, it was clear that the Luftwaffe's experience still gave it a considerable edge. However, General Konstantin Rokossovsky felt that the Germans would only be able to maintain this level of support for so long before fatigue and attrition took their toll. The Soviets' deep well of manpower and its titanic manufacturing infrastructure would allow them to grind the fascists down. Rokossovsky promised Stalin that air superiority would be achieved the following day. His optimism would not be immediately realized, however. July 6th started with more heavy losses for the Soviet Air Force when the 16th Air Army lost 91 planes during a botched counterattack after a few of its fighters alerted the intercepting Germans to the direction of the attack. The fighting was fierce in the other sectors as well, as 23-year-old Soviet La-5 pilot Ivan Kozhedub could tell you. Although many of his unfortunate comrades were shot down that day, Kozhedub survived and managed to score his first victory during an attack against a group of Stuka dive bombers. Nevertheless, Soviet losses were so high that High Command had to transfer fighters from other wings to ensure the 16th's survival. In the southern sector, losses were somewhat less catastrophic, with the Soviet 2nd and 17th Air Armies having lost a total of 80 planes by the end of the day. By comparison, the Luftwaffe counted only 22 aircraft lost, most of which were due to anti-aircraft fire. After 2 days of fighting, it was clear that Rokossovsky had failed to fulfill his promises to Stalin. Meanwhile, the front line on the ground had hardly moved at all. On July 7th, the fortunes of war seemed to finally shift in the Soviets' favor. A bombing raid took the 2nd Panzer Division by surprise as it was assembling for its scheduled morning attack. Caught in the open, the unit suffered considerable losses. Later that day, the division's assault was bogged down when strong Stuka support failed to break the Soviet defense, and Soviet bomber and Sturmovik raids continually harassed the advance. The Luftwaffe's efforts had come at the cost of pilot Kurt Albert Pape, a Knight's Cross holder with over 350 missions to his name, whose Stuka was shot down by Yak-1 fighters. But all was not sunshine and stroganoff for the Soviets. A counterattack in the south utterly collapsed when German ground attack aircraft armed with anti-tank cannons wiped out the 2nd Guard Tank Corps, marking the first time in the history of warfare that an entire tank formation had been defeated by air power alone. However, as the battle raged, it became increasingly clear that the Luftwaffe's air support was proving insufficient to help the northern advance break through towards Kursk. The intensity of the battle cost the Germans dearly, with the Luftwaffe losing 3 of its most experienced Stuka pilots in one day. The Soviet Air Force, on the other hand, was starting to mold its own aces. On July 8th, the budding Ivan Kozhedub added to his tally and managed to shoot down 2 Bf-109 fighters. He described his kills thusly: "I held the firing button squeeze and blasted away a long burst, and it was sufficient. The leader turned over from his steep dive, and I saw him hit the ground." We would like to think that Kozhedub later commented that it's always sunny in Leningrad. due to the lack of progress in the northern sector, half of the 1st Flieger Division was transferred to support a possible breakthrough in the south. There, the bolstered air support helped the SS Totenkopf Division overrun the 3rd Soviet defensive belt. Besides its accuracy, the Stuka's infamous siren terrified inexperienced Red Army soldiers. The Russians run from Stukas, reported the Totenkopf Division. The neighboring Großdeutschland Division was similarly impressed with the Luftwaffe's performance, noting in its daily report, "While the enemy forces limited themselves to attack against targets in the rear, our Luftwaffe, above all the Stuka, offered absolutely outstanding support to the Panzer Spearhead, with notable success." Back in the north, the remaining Stuka formations took off to support a desperate final push by the 9th Army to break through the Soviet line. However, strong Russian counterattacks, supported by its own larger air force, managed to push the Germans back. By then, it was becoming clear that the German offensive would not be able to reach Kursk, having only managed to advance a few miles into the heavily defended salient. The northern advance was ordered to halt on July 12th. A few days later, the southern thrust would be ground to a halt as well. Operation Citadel had failed. After a week of near-constant fighting, the Soviet Air Force had suffered about 1,200 losses. By comparison, the Luftwaffe had only lost around 240 of its own aircraft. By all accounts, the latter had clearly outclassed its counterpart on the battlefield. Moreover, the Luftwaffe's flying artillery had proven its worth twofold against the deeply entrenched Soviet defenders. However, this tactical superiority ultimately failed to bring the offensive to a successful conclusion. Although the Luftwaffe had managed to keep the numerically superior Soviet Air Force at bay, it simply lacked the strength in numbers to make a difference to the course of the battle. Moreover, with the added help of Lend-Leased aircraft, the Soviet Strategic Reserve could afford to absorb the heavy toll it suffered at the hands of the Luftwaffe. The same could not be said of the Germans. Even though their aircraft losses were relatively manageable, the offensive had come at the considerable cost of several of its most experienced pilots. In addition, the strain of combat and the constant pressure from the Soviet Air Force had totally exhausted the German forces by the end of the offensive. The Soviet Air Force would only grow stronger and more experienced as 1944 began. By the end of the Battle of Kursk in August, the Luftwaffe had ceded control over the skies. The Valkyries of Hitler's Germany would ride no longer.